Now we'll talk about external requirements. So these are things you want to keep in mind and make sure you have in place ahead of time before deploying the identity appliance. It'll make your job a whole lot easier and make the install process go much smoother. The first is DNS, both forward and reverse lookups. This is extremely important as VCAC, all the different components, whether it's identity service or the other ones, really depend on DNS. So not only do you want to assign static IP addresses to all your virtual appliances, but you also want to make sure all the DNS entries are set up ahead of time and that when you input the DNS server, it can actually resolve both forward and reverse lookups for all those names. Trust me, it'll save you some headaches later on if you make sure this is in place. Next, we have SSL certificates. Now, SSL is very important because, as I said before, the identity service uses tokens to exchange authentication information. Well, how do the components identify and authenticate each other? SSL certificates. So it's very important that either you use a self-signed certificate or you have a CA that's generating those certs, but those certs need to be in place and they need to be the same ones on all the different components. You'll notice when we go through the actual installation of the identity service in the next course, SSL certificates have to be imported onto the other components before you can even install them and finish the setup. So these are very important. Next, we have NTP, and this is a common theme throughout a lot of vCenter or vSphere components, is correct time, especially for authentication when it's so dependent on the timing. So I authenticate at this exact moment in time, check that authentication against a server, is very important for times to match up. So the time on an Active Directory server and the time on the identity appliance, very important. And you also want to make sure you have Active Directory credentials ahead of time. So when you go to hook this up to Active Directory, so you'll make an external identity provider, you'll want to have the credentials of a domain administrator or someone that can query the database and correctly add in the identity service as a provider that can look up and authenticate against those Active Directory users and groups. So you want to make sure you have those credentials ahead of time.